I'm Zara Davies, and I'm thrilled to be joining you here at CogX today. I'm a partner at QuantumBlack, where I and the teams I work with use machine learning to tackle really tough problems. The aim is always to improve performance. That could be from the performance of a sports team to the performance of a blue chip company. The applications of machine learning are for sure very varied, but a common theme for us is always the desire to push the boundaries. Now, today I'm thrilled to be joined by Malte Huneke from Porsche Motorsport. My own organisation actually had its origins in motorsport, so especially excited to be here talking to Malte today. He's been the technical leader at Porsche Formula E and is now responsible for complete vehicle engineering in Porsche Motorsport. And I think it's actually very appropriate that we're here on the Lab to Live stage today, as Malte has been experimenting and innovating in bringing machine learning to Formula E and taking it from the lab to the track. Now, Malte, it would be great to kick off by hearing what got you and Porsche interested in Formula E to start with.
Yeah, Zara, first of all, thanks for the short introduction, and of course also welcome everybody to this talk here. It's great to be here today. What got us interested in Formula E? I mean, first of all, the whole car industry and Porsche as well is moving towards electrification of their fleet, of their products, mainly in the aim of reducing net CO2 emissions. And of course, as a sports car manufacturer, we always look for possibility to compete and to develop technology in a competitive environment, to then finally bring it on the road. And then Formula E, with being a pure electric race car world championship since this season, and its very high emphasis on efficiency, fits just very well into this context.
Fantastic. And I mean, Formula E, it's still a relatively new motorsport. So I'm conscious that some in the audience today may not be so familiar with it. So let us share just a little video to introduce everyone to Formula E and what it's like on the track.
It's still side by side through the final corner.
Lotte on attack.
Oh, and that is
Gianni, innocent victim.
no one can see anything here. The flames coming now as well. Sliding out across the line. Provisional pole for Porsche. Gianni is going to get his best qualifying position of the season. Porsche on the podium.
Not bad first start, huh, boys?
Incredible race.
I love that video, I have to say. Malte, it'd be great to hear kind of what got you interested in the potential for using data and machine learning in Formula E.
Yeah, Zara, as we just saw before, the Formula E races, they are very action-packed, very tight racing. And of course, we started off with just, let's say, basic racing knowledge. There's a lot of things that you can understand, simple rules, what to do, what not to do, what is strategically good, what is potentially less optimal. And but we didn't see a straightforward way to, let's say, analytically really optimize the strategy. So we just asked ourselves what could be a way to really learn about the patterns of an optimal strategy in Formula E. And that basically brought us to machine learning, where we thought, okay, we have our version A of a strategy, some simple rules, and then what is if we put something competing in the situation? And that is, that got us interested in using machine learning for exactly this question.
Got it. And what were the kinds of decisions that you could apply these data and these machine learning techniques to?
Yeah, one very special thing in Formula E is that these races are energy limited. It's not that the battery is too small, but it's in order to emphasize energy efficiency. Basically, we are not allowed to use more than a certain amount of energy. So that's part of the rule set. That means you have to be very, very cautious with where you use energy, how you recuperate energy. So this is one of the big strategic levers: when to use how much energy, keep position, try to fight for position, such things. Then there's another thing in the Formula E sporting regulations, which make the races quite action-packed, quite interesting, is that there's a so-called attack mode. So we basically have to leave the ideal line of the racing track in order to go over some loops which are basically put into the asphalt in order to activate what is called attack mode. And with this, we can run at higher power for a certain amount of time. This typically happens 2 times in a race for like 4 minutes, and it's mandatory to use that. So we are losing positions by activating it if the gap is too small, and we're gaining back time with using the attack mode. And of course, this is the second strategic lever that we all have.
Got it. So from your perspective, there were some really clear decisions and applications for machine learning into Formula E. What did you find was really critical to the success of actually using AI and machine learning and deploying it?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, I think the team needs to be open-minded to trying new approaches. Yeah, because of course you're leaving known ground, you're trying something new, so the team needs to be ready for that. Yeah, you can't, as a leader, you can't say, okay, now we head this direction and expect everybody to run into that direction. So everybody needs to be ready by himself, wanting to try these new things. Then of course we needed a lot of different talent that we got together, and then tried to find a common language on how to formulate this problem and how to find solutions. So on one side, there are traditional, on the motorsport side, there are simulation engineers, guys that are doing physical models. They do simulations for lap time to just understand the underlying problem. But then there are also the data scientists, which bring in the machine learning part of this all, and they are the software engineers. Somebody needs to bring it into a product that we can finally use. And last but not least, there are the users, so the race engineers and the performance engineers. The race engineer finally needs to make the decision about how to use energy and when to take attack mode. So all the responsibility is on his shoulders. So he needs to have a big part in developing this. So this is basically these are critical factors to have all these people on board, to have all these different types of talents in the mix. But then also there is a need for a certain degree of resilience, because with trying new things, not everything will work right away. There's a constant need for iteration, and there are also dead-end roads to be expected. So it's basically you need a team that is then willing to fight for it and also doesn't stop when there are the first struggles coming across.
That's really interesting to hear. And I think I'd love to pick up on some of those themes that you were just mentioning, Malte. You started by talking about this kind of the team needing to be really open-minded to experimenting with new approaches. And I can imagine that in some ways a motorsport organization would be more used to innovating, to experimenting, but actually in many other organizations, particularly larger organizations, it can be quite difficult to get that mindset, to kind of instill that kind of culture. I mean, how do you go about creating that sort of open-mindedness, that experimental mindset in your own teams, in your organization?
Yeah, that's indeed a very good question, Zara. And I mean, first of all, also in motorsport, although we are happy and willing to do experiments, also there the people they're all highly loaded with daily work. There are a lot of things to do just to come to the start line, to come to the event, to compete, and of course then to ask to go another mile to try something new is always tricky. So I think, first of all, we need to give experiments a room to exist. Yeah, and how can we do this? I mean, we can do this by supporting curiosity and also by just, let's say, giving the problem a little bit of time to be developed. So we cannot basically set a timeline and say, okay, we have this experiment, so 15 days from now everything needs to work. So this will not work. So there needs a room, a certain setting in which such an experiment can exist. And last but not least, also managing expectations is important, because if we have too high expectations, if we're only happy if everything works from the beginning, then this will lead to problems within the team, problems towards motivation. So all these things need to be sorted out before and also during the process. I think that's quite important.
Yeah. And it sounds like the kind of the leadership, the culture and the expectations that are set, are such a key part of it, in terms of actually enabling some of these experiments to really flourish. Fantastic. And then you were also talking about collaboration, so many different skill sets in there, the really technical folks in your teams, the race engineers, the performance engineers, the simulation engineers needing to work alongside the data scientists, the software engineers. How do you, help manage that collaboration across such diverse skill sets? And I can imagine that over the last year and a half, with everyone working remotely as well, that's probably been an additional challenge in there.
Yes, for sure, Zara. That's been an additional challenge. But apart from that, I think it mostly depends on the people involved. So having the right mindset is probably the most important thing, because generally, at least to our experience, all engineers with a similar mindset, with a strive to optimize things, with a strong will to get the best possible solution, they typically get along with each other very well. So no matter whether they are simulation engineers, classical mechanical engineers, data scientists, or software engineers. But what they of course need is they need an opportunity to dive deep into topics together. And then for this, they need, of course, space and time, very simply speaking. And then for an intense collaboration, this is ideally in the real world, especially if the team or parts of the team are new to each other. So then it's very important also in brainstorming phases and conceptual phases, where really you have to jump from idea to idea. For sure, there will be found ways in the future where that also works nicely remotely. But today we are very happy to do this, let's say, in the real world, if possible. Then once smaller scopes need to be tackled together, remote work is just working fine. And it's a good alternative. And it also often saves time just in terms of traveling. Yeah, when lots of specialists have to get together, it's also a big investment from everybody to travel to one place. And so we basically need to carefully play both opportunities.
Yeah. Sometimes there's just no substitute for being together in person in real life, as you say, for those critical moments. But then, moving to the hybrid ways of working where possible. Yeah. Just a quick mention for everyone in the audience, for everyone who's joining, if you've got questions coming up about how Porsche's Formula E team have approached AI, please do feel free to drop them into chat. And when we move into the Q&A part, we'll pick up on as many of them as we can in the time. Malte, I guess just moving along, as you were deploying machine learning techniques, what were some of the challenges that you found along the way that you and the teams had to find a way through?
Yeah, there were a lot of challenges, obviously, but one was particularly big. That was the limited availability of data. Because, of course, if we are when we are at the racetrack, we basically get, for example, timing data streamed. So we know where each competitor is, we know at which pace each competitor is running, we know whether he has or has not taken attack mode and how many already. And all of this data was only available in a very limited amount. So we were basically entering Formula E for season 6, which was the season that started end of 2019, and we started let's say, development of the strategy software already, end of 18, beginning of 19. So we were basically moving in parallel with season N-1, so season 5. And so that was the only data that we had available to us. We could basically listen into the races and get some data. But that was everything that we had. So, and in, let's say, in machine learning context, this is not very much data if we think about how much we needed for training. So in the end, we also had to set up a simulation of full Formula E races just to generate more data, more training data, and to come across more situations, which was, again, a challenge in itself, especially because we have to make this representative of the real world problem. There's a strong need to generate something via simulation.
Got it. Yeah. So the kind of constraints of very limited data. So in some ways, during the races, I guess there's lots happening in a very short period of time. So very concentrated data. But then given that Porsche was entering end of 2019, not having that much historical data, and how you actually overcome those challenges through then needing to simulate. Really fascinating. And I have to ask, given that this is the lab to live stage, what was your experience of actually taking this from the lab to the track, taking these models from, experimenting with them to actually deploying them live during a race?
Yeah, that was actually one of the biggest challenges of them all, to really bring it from the lab to the track, and it still is a big challenge. The biggest challenge there is really to build trust, because as we also could see before, that is also actually representative of what we see in the video, or what we saw in the video, is the Formula E race is a very fast-paced environment. So it's 45 minutes plus one lap. Everybody is racing very, very close to each other. So the decisions, especially the tech mode, they have to be made very, very quickly. And the consequences from these decisions are potentially very big. Yeah, we can easily lose a couple of positions if we make a mistake there. So how can I, from a user's perspective, be sure that this black box actually gives me the right suggestions? So how we try to solve this is just that we try to prove ourselves again and again by running basically comparisons or competitions between the statistical learning based method and other simpler logics that we would try to beat these in these comparisons, and via this building trust. But this is, of course, it's still an ongoing process, and you really need to be very sure that the thing works properly during a race. Also, making sure that the whole analytics and the software runs without fail in all race situations. There are all kinds of awkward situations in a race. There can be a red flag, there can be a safety car, there can be a full course yellow, there can be a partial drop of data, there can potentially be inconsistent data coming to the garage, and then the software has to be able to deal with all kinds of such situations. So it needs to be very robust. And last but not least, it needs to be, let's say, all computations need to happen at a very high speed, not exactly real time, but actually with minimal delay, just to really be able to react quickly if a certain situation unfolds.
Yeah, it's really interesting, actually, some of the themes that you were just touching on there, Malte, because, I think in this kind of context where, machine learning is being deployed in a sports context, you might have thought actually performance was everything, performance of the model and getting the highest performing model that's going to deliver the best possible recommendations, which, in many worlds would end up, often there's a trade-off between performance versus the explainability. So, it seems like, at first you might have tended towards actually thinking, okay, performance, that's the most important thing. But then you were talking a lot there about user trust and how you build that, which means that actually you've got to find ways around that, ways through it, where actually, the kind of day-to-day users of these tools, of these models can really understand how it's working and get that confidence.
Yeah, exactly. That is absolutely essential in this whole process, because at the end of the day, also the race engineers, they bring a lot of knowledge about the fundamental problem, and in every situation they have an idea what to do. And if basically the race engineers' intuition, also well-informed intuition with lots of simple logic in the background, uh, goes in line with the suggestion from an AI-based tool, that's all fine. But as soon as they conflict each other, then there's of course always the question, am I getting the right suggestion? Is this the best thing to do now?
Yeah.
Very tricky.
Absolutely, absolutely. We're starting to get some really interesting questions in from the audience, so I'd love to be able to share some of those. And everyone, if you've got questions that are coming up, do feel free to just drop them into the chat. And as I say, we'll get to as many of them as we can. Let's kick off, with a question around how the models are actually deployed. Are they in the sports car, in the racing car, or are they actually being used in a slightly different way? Malte, it'd be great to get your insight there.
Yeah, of course. The deep learning models, I mean, they're different applications of let's say statistical based learning in a racing environment. For the problem we're talking about here, so the strategy, this is all running off board the car. So basically in the garage on some computing hardware that is not running with the car, because of course this logic needs a lot of information from the timing system, which the car doesn't have. And also the car is not allowed to communicate with the garage, or only in a very, very limited manner. So this is everything what is happening inside the garage. Other applications are, of course, for example, if we want to try and generate information that we can't generate because there's no sensor for it on board the car. So basically to replace sensors with a virtual version of a sensor. So this is a typical example in a race car. There are many. These are probably the most interesting ones. Yeah, just generate new information from within the car that can then be used in either control systems, or also in order to better analyze what the car did in hindsight when we post-process all the data that we gather.
Got it. And so actually the models are largely being deployed in the garage for the engineers, rather than actually sitting in the car itself, just due to all the constraints over what who has what information live during the races, and therefore where the model's best placed to sit to actually guide that decision making. Got it.
Yeah, exactly.
We've got a question in, actually building on the sort of collaboration topics that we were touching on earlier, around how do you put together teams that have this kind of cross-functional skill sets and these kinds of agile ways of working. How do you put together those kinds of teams and build that culture where you can do this kind of cutting-edge work?
Yeah, that's a very good question. The question is also, what would be the ideal way to do that? I really don't know. So how did we do it? We basically got together a team where we thought, or where we think everybody is highly motivated, very skilled in their specialized area. So we have the simulation engineers, which know a lot about the fundamental problem of what generates lap time, how is lap time generated. We have the race engineers that basically know how racing works, and then we have the data scientists and the software engineers, which know everything else which comes downstream. And then I think the most important thing is really to have a clear understanding of the ultimate goal, and to have I wouldn't say a vision, but the direction needs to be clear for everybody involved. And then once that is clear and everybody works together, let's say with an equal stake on the problem, let's say everybody's voice in the team counts equally. So I think that is very important, so that you can really discuss from every perspective what is probably the right thing to do, and always be open-minded to listen, let's say, to the other specialist. I think that's quite critical, because it's always difficult in the beginning to find a common language. A data scientist has a completely different background than a simulation engineer or even a race engineer. And probably the most important thing is that they start to understand each other and that they find a common understanding of the problem. Yeah, when you first describe it, a race engineer describes it, a simulation engineer describes it, then data scientists understands B, but he meant A. And so you really need to negotiate again and again about the understanding, the fundamental understanding. And I think if everybody has this goal in mind and is open-minded to really always listen to the other party and really trying to understand and not just saying, oh, this guy is not understanding my way of seeing it, then I think this is one of the most important ingredients, just to have this open-mindedness.
Yeah, I think that the sort of listening, the open-mindedness that you're flagging there, really resonate with me and with what I've seen as well. I mean, I can also imagine that with each of these different skill sets, each person is bringing something quite distinct to the table, and so as you say, kind of figuring out how to communicate, figuring out who knows what and who's bringing that also really in-depth race experience versus the data scientist who may not have quite as in-depth experience in motorsport, but knows the kinds of models that we need to build. So how you kind of bring all of that together into the melting pot becomes
basically everybody really needs to step out of his, let's say, known garden and be open to understand how does the garden of the other person look like. I think this is really important, to not have boundaries in the head.
Yeah, absolutely. We've got a question around there's a lot of effort up front to develop these kinds of models. How much effort is it then to kind of sustain them or keep evolving the models going forwards?
Yeah, I mean, the models also exist not exclusively of models that are used for the strategic problem only. These models that we are using, just the simulation framework that stands in the background, is also used for day-to-day optimization of the vehicle performance, of how the vehicle behaves. So overall, there's a huge effort and always keeping this model alive, keeping it up to date, adjusting it to every track, to every circumstances, to potential further development on the car side, on the tire side, whatever. And then also there's a huge or big effort to keep the infrastructure always up to speed. Yeah, if somebody decides to change something on the timing protocol side, this needs to be updated as well. And last but not least, let's say the core that is giving recommendations on the decisions also needs to use every data that comes in, every race that is finished needs to be used again as training data. So overall, of course, it's a proper effort, but part of it is anyway a part of our day-to-day business.
Got it. And we've got a question in from the audience around how there's been a real sort of surge explosion in the number of uses of digital twins and AI, that kind of combination. And I was interested in, how are Porsche thinking about extending, the use of this kind of application of machine learning or other applications of machine learning, across the broader organization?
Yeah, I mean, I certainly do not know every single initiative within Porsche. What I see is that the methods just become more and more standard, if you can at all say standard, but they become more and more used across the whole organization, and they just become a natural tool set of what we use in our day-to-day work. And so I can't really tell in detail how many things are being tackled with statistical learning methods, but the applications become more and more. Of course, also we need to be aware that not every answer can be given with these methods. Yeah, they are suitable for certain kinds of problems, and sometimes they just give an interesting insight that we didn't have before, and sometimes we can use them directly in a productive manner. So yeah, there are a lot of use cases today.
Absolutely. I guess a couple more questions just before we wrap in a couple of minutes' time. Last but one question would be, what's the how much impact does AI have, and machine learning have on, race outcomes from your perspective versus other factors? I've watched a number of Formula E races, and I also see that there's a fair number of crashes. There's some quite unpredictable things that are also happening in races. But it would be great to get your perspective, Malte, on that kind of balance between how much does AI influence or drive the performance of the team versus all those other factors out there.
Yeah, that really depends, of course, on the specific race situation that we have. Basically, the overriding factor in a Formula E race is the driver. That is clear, and then also the whole team's performance, which is being generated with let's say established methods, with established ways of how to do things. So there's a huge, let's say, huge organization in the background that just takes care of all the racing, and then what AI can do in this specific context with strategy optimization, it can give us a hint to try and flip one position or two positions maximum. Yeah, so it's not that the question is, do we win a race or do we lose a race? But it can give us a small competitive edge, which is also what you need in an environment where the competition is extremely close. Yeah, so I hope that gives a little bit of an, let's say, insight. I know that's not very quantitatively expressed, but I think qualitatively this gives a first idea of what the impact is that we can have with AI.
Absolutely. And then I guess, Malte, what would be your advice to others who are looking at how they embark on this journey, how they deploy machine learning, maybe to novel applications that haven't been tried before?
Yeah, I think first and foremost, it's the open-mindedness. It is the, let's say, the culture to embrace opportunities is very important, but at the same time, staying with 2 feet on the ground. Yeah, there are always, let's say, forces in the team that try to follow the latest big trends, but they can also, because often they are experimental, they can also lead you nowhere. And so I think this is really the mix that we need: is embracing, be open-minded, try to understand how can we get something out of these new opportunities, and at the same time stay with 2 feet on the ground and be also realistic what you can do with a new method and what you can maybe not do with a new method, and also manage these expectations, because of course with new methods coming in, new tools coming in, some will say, this will lead nowhere, and others will say, yeah, this will be everything. And the truth is somewhere in the middle. And this needs to be, let's say, understood and well negotiated in the whole team.
Got it. And actually, Malte, just one thing you were just touching on there, what's your advice on people in terms of how to sort of stay up to date, to other leads, how to stay up to date with all these kind of new possibilities that are coming through, new techniques, but also even beyond machine learning, the different ways that they could go tackle the problems that they're facing?
Yeah, I mean, there are always different ways. I think the fundamental thing that helps you keeping up is just, let's say, supporting curiosity in the team, curiosity for new things. And then also what is always very fruitful for us is working with young engineers that want to write a thesis on something, no matter whether it's a bachelor, master's, or a PhD. Just stay connected with these people that also work in academia, and give them an opportunity to show what they've learned, because they've learned the latest things typically. And I think these things together are very important.
Fantastic. Well, I think that's probably all we've got time for this morning, but I hope everyone's enjoyed the session as much as I have, hearing from Malte this morning about his experiences of deploying machine learning. For those of you who are excited, want to see more about the impact of machine learning in Formula E, we're fortunate actually. The next races in Formula E are just this weekend with back-to-back races in Mexico. And for those who are based in the UK, we actually have Formula E coming to London just next month at the end of July. So I'll certainly be there and hope to see many of you there too. But in the meantime, thank you so much to Malte for joining us. And thank you to everyone who's joined and shared your questions too. Enjoy the rest of CogX.